Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and T-Bone.
I'm BK, he's T-Bone. This is the Redbird Report. Appreciate you guys tuning in today. Should be a fun episode. We got to talk about Ivan Herrera. He was unbelievable. 3 homers. That was my guy that I believed coming into the season was going to show us something that we hadn't seen previously. My pick to click for the 2025 season. Not tooting my own horn, but, you know, toot. T-Bone, I think overall, the team has been better than I expected them to be coming into the season. They're 4-2. The 2 losses are in extra innings, and nothing too noteworthy there in terms of, like, terrifying signs of what could be problematic for them. They've had at least 10 hits in every game so far this season. That's a fun brand of baseball to watch. The pitching staff, I mean, there's been some cracks in the bullpen for sure, but I think a lot of people expected that. There's a lot of young guys that you're trying to break into that unit. But overall, I mean, again, 4-2, the 2 losses coming in extra innings. Yeah, you don't want to lose 2 out of 3 against the Angels. That's not ideal, but you swept the Twins. I would say so far, just looking big picture before we get into some of the more micro stuff from the season thus far, I've been impressed by what we've seen baseball-wise from the Cardinals. Where are you at so far? Again, 10,000-foot view of where we are a week into this season.
Yeah, I'd say I'm impressed as well so far with them offensively. I was not expecting them to be a team that was going to have a potential offensive identity, and I think that might be them this year because you look at them 1 through 9 so far, they've been very good for the most part, outside of, like, Contreras not hitting. But like you mentioned, I mean, they've had 10-plus hits in 6 straight games, and your best hitter, as we talked about last week, hasn't done squat for you so far. The guy that was supposed to be, I'm sure they thought this going into the year, the leadoff guy in Mason Wynn. I don't think they got to the conclusion. I know they're selling this narrative of, oh, yeah, we really considered Newbar. I don't think they got there until about halfway through spring training, but that's fine.
Yeah,
he hasn't done a lot for you so far this season. So they've been very impressive to me, and I was one of those to where if you came into the season and were higher on the offense like you were, maybe you're looking at this going, hey, I told you. See, that's validation right there, baby. I came into it going, I think they could be one of the worst offenses in baseball, and I've been pleasantly surprised, and it looks sustainable. I think that is the most important part of everything that we've seen from them offensively. Everything looks like it will sustain as the season goes along. This isn't fluky like 10 hits and you look and like 8 of those 10 hits came off the bat as like little bloopers that fell into the outfield. No, man, they're hitting the ball hard. Even on their singles, they are hitting the ball hard.
At this point in the season, it's hard to look at much in terms of the numbers. And if you're listening to the show and you're new to it, you haven't heard me on the radio side of things before, I am affectionately, I would consider myself a numbers nerd. But at this point in the season, it's much more based on feel and eye test and vibes around the club. And when you watch them right now, the process looks really good, man. The at-bats are competitive, basically from start to finish. Mason went early in the season, the first few games. I don't know that I would necessarily describe him that way, but otherwise, almost everybody they've put in there been super competitive. Nolan Gorman, he hasn't had a ton of opportunities thus far, but looks good early on this season. Luken Baker, who at times last year just looked completely overmatched by the major league level. That happens. We saw it with Mason Wynn his first season, where he came up at the end of the year, looked completely overmatched, and then last year had a borderline all-star level campaign. Well, this year, Luken Baker has been a huge boost, and they need it against left-handed pitching. Lars Nootbaar looks like a different version of himself. When I watch it, I think to myself, oh, he must be swinging a little bit more. He is a little bit more free. And the answer is no, he has almost the exact same approach that he's been in the past. You look into it, the swing rates are the same. I looked into, all right, he must be crushing hitters counts, like 0-0, 2-0, 3-0, 3-1. That must be where he's doing his damage. Do you know how many hits he has so far this year in hitters counts?
All right, so on the year, what's he got? He's got 10 hits. I'll go 5. I'll go 50% of his hits.
Not one.
Really?
Which is shocking to me.
Wow.
He has not had a hit in a hitter's count so far this season. He has seen 37 pitches in a hitter's count, and zero of them have resulted in a hit thus far. And I don't really know what to make of that other than that's where he should be doing his damage, and instead he's doing his damage in pitcher's counts, where he has taken 8 swings that resulted in a batted ball, and on 6 of them, they have resulted in hits, most of which went for extra bases. He's just hitting the crap out of the ball regardless of the count, and he's been better in 2 strike counts this year than he has been in the past. I don't know if that's a Brant Brown thing. I don't know if that is a pitch recognition thing for Nootbaar. I can't explain why this has been the case, but I'm mentioning Nootbaar specifically because that is a change from what we have seen from him in the past, and it's been implemented into the games, and he is not alone in that. Jordan Walker looks more competitive against sliders so far this year. Like, all of the guys on the team, just, it seems as though they're walking to the plate right now. They have a clear and cohesive plan on how they're going to attack that day's pitcher. And maybe something that I love the most, they're different plans. Everybody has an individual idea of what they can do to win against that pitcher on that day. And I think there have been times in the past where the Cardinals will go up to the plate and it's like everybody has the same plan. That doesn't work when you have a bunch of guys in your lineup that have varied skill sets. Victor Scott should not be going to the plate with the same approach as Luke and Baker. In fact, they should be almost the opposite approaches. And you're seeing that right now. And Vic has taken some really good at-bats where it's resulting in power, hitting a home run. Or he's also laying down a bunt when it's called for as well and getting a base hit out of a bunt. So I've been really impressed by their approach so far this year, and I never know who to give credit for to that. Some of it absolutely deserves to go to Brant Brown, the new hitting coach, but some of it's also on the players for taking that approach that they're getting from the hitting side of things, the coaching side of things, and actually figuring out a way to implement that into their game on any given day. So I've been super impressed by the hitting approach. Again, 10-plus hits each of the 6 games thus far. It's the first time that the Cardinals have done that in 60 years. I can't say enough about it's a fun version of baseball to watch. They're putting the ball into play. They're getting hits out of it. This is what everybody in Cardinals Nation wanted to see coming into the season.
And I'm glad you mentioned that part of, you don't have guys that are trying to swing for the fences that don't belong in that. And we saw in spring training what happens when a guy that doesn't really fit into that, Mason Wynn, what happens, right? He ends up kind of messing with the swing a little too much, maybe striding out too much, which is what the Cardinals have been saying he's doing. And now he's at the point where he's trying to reconfigure his swing on the fly in the middle of the season instead of just sticking to the approach that had worked for him last year. Now, I get a player seeing, hey, can I add some power? That's not a bad thing to try out, but now you've seen it hasn't worked. Brant Brown's going to work with Mason Wynn, and this is where I'll really start to give Brant Brown his flowers. And I'm not trying to, downplay what he's done so far, because what he's doing right now with this hitting staff has been impressive, or with this hitting group. I want to see how quickly he can really turn things on for guys that are struggling, going through these slumps. Because that was the biggest thing we had on Turner Ward, I feel like, the last 2 years, which was, hey, they kept saying, well, I've been working on this. Okay, but Goldie, we're not seeing the change.
Yeah.
Where is that change coming now? Is that an age-related thing to Paul Goldschmidt? Or is it, hey, is the hitting coach not helping enough to get you to the point where you need to go? Because the most important part is when you get to these players to go through these slumps, Mason Wynn and Contreras in them now, is how quick you can get them out of it. You look at Jordan Walker, Victor Scott. These guys are playing really well. Their approaches look different, and that is a credit to Brant Brown. And I was all in on Jordan Walker's adjustments at winter warm-up. But at some point, he's going to go through a struggle. Baseball is going to make the next adjustment for a Walker and a Victor Scott. The question will be, how quickly can they and Brant Brown adjust to when these pitching staffs make those adjustments? Because that is the biggest thing and the most important thing for a hitting coach, is to help guys in the offseason, but most importantly, when you get into season, help them adjust.
Agreed. Now also put yourself into those players' shoes. Part of this is proof of concept.
Sure.
And one of the value of having this success early on, if you're Victor Scott, Lars Nootbaar, Jordan Walker, whomever, right, is that you have now seen, okay, the stuff that I have done to get myself to this level, the stuff that I worked on during the offseason with Brant Brown, it's working. And so now, when, as you mentioned, you go through those struggles, you have trust that this guy is going to be able to get me out of it, because he's also the one that put me ahead, that allowed me to have that success early on in the season. So I think there's so much value to having this early on. I'm glad that we're seeing it quickly with Wilson Contreras and Mason Wynn both having their struggles to start out the year. We can see how they're able to adjust with Brant Brown, see what that looks like. But, yeah, you're right. Lars Nootbaar is going to go through a 2 for 22. Yeah. He will. Now, he'll walk a ton during that stretch, which will help keep his on-base percentage afloat. But he's going to have a stretch where he strikes out more than you want. And it doesn't look right because he consistently is pulling off of the ball, and now it's just dribblers to second base, dribblers to second base. We know what it's going to look like when he's going through those struggles. And then it becomes a question of how quickly are they able to get him back to where he's at right now? Because what he is right now is an all-star level outfielder.
Yeah.
What we're watching right now
Brandon
is...
Nimmo.
But maybe better.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but Lars Nootbaar, you're not going to find many guys in Major League Baseball that are hitting the ball harder, more consistently, and doing more damage when they make contact than what Newt has done so far this year. This is what the Cardinals hoped he would be. This is always what the plan was for him, is you look at the underlying metrics, the nerdy numbers down there, and you're like, man, if that guy figures it out, if he can do this more consistently, he's going to be a really good player because he's already athletic. He's got the defense. He clearly has the batter's eye, and when he makes contact with the ball, he hits it really hard. It's just got to all come together, and he has to stay healthy. And also, he's got to get off to a better start.
Yeah.
In his past, he's been a guy that is a notoriously slow starter, and this year we're finally seeing him figure it out early in the season. So that's been really impressive. But I'm with you. The adjustments, they are going to have to come for some of these guys that are currently looking really impressive at the plate. They will go through their struggles, but their successes early on make you feel better if you're in their position of, this guy's going to be able to get me back on track whenever those struggles come.
And I'm glad you brought that up because thinking back to last year, the whole talk around Jordan Walker going into 2024 was he's got to lift the ball, right? He's got to get the ball up in the air. And him and Turner Ward had talked about making the adjustments. And then when you see it doesn't work, on top of seeing some of the struggles that you went through in 2023 at that point for Jordan Walker before he got sent back down, I can understand how a player, and look, I think there is some truth of, hey, sometimes the players maybe are too stubborn and aren't willing to listen to the hitting coach a little bit more. But, like, if you're Jordan Walker, I can get how you can look at it and go, man, Turner Ward, and I hate to throw Ward under the bus, but he's no longer here. So you look at Turner Ward and you go, this guy, like, how me changed my stance. I got off to a terrible start, got optioned down to AAA, and now he's telling me to do these other adjustments. Why should I believe that these are going to work? I want to get back to being myself, and that's what I found interesting going all the way back to winter warm-up, was when he had mentioned, when Jordan Walker was talking about Brant Brown, he said, hey, we're getting back to more that what makes me successful. And that is where, I mean, you look at Jordan Walker still, he's still hitting the ball on the ground a lot.
I was about to say, have you looked up his ground
I think
ball
it's
rate?
close to the same, isn't it?
It's 53%, which is actually higher than it was last year, believe it or not. And significantly higher than it was in year one.
But I think, and we've talked about this before with Walker, man, he hits the ball so freaking hard, just like Nootbaar. He just doesn't get off the ground. It doesn't matter, though. The defenders
Some of his RBIs have been
Yeah.
ground balls that are just absolutely smoked off the bat, and the defender has no chance.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe he's not going to end up being the slugger that the Cardinals were thinking, like a guy that, oh, well, you look at that guy, I mean, he's built like a tank. Maybe he's not going to be the 30 home run, 100 RBI guy. Can he be like a 15 homer and then like hits a bunch of doubles because he hits the ball so hard? Like if he does put one, I mean, we saw this in the series, I can't remember if it was the Angels or the Twins series, but he had just that missile down the third baseline. That was 118 miles an hour. He has a double if it doesn't end up catching that little corner that kicks out there.
I've mentioned this before on our show, and I'll mention it here. He reminds me so much of younger Eric Hosmer. Early career Eric Hosmer, and really it ended up being the thing that prevented him from becoming a true like MVP caliber type of player, but he was on the ground all the time.
Yeah.
And when you have that and you consistently are on the ground, it caps what your ceiling is. And that's the thing that they've always said with Walker. I know people latched on to this. They really want him to get the ball in the air. And the reason why is because that unlocks your potential. If you can get the ball in the air more often, what they're really saying is they want line drives. They're not telling you we want a bunch of lazy fly balls. No. Take those grounders and make them into line drives. And when you get those, that's where your doubles come from. That's where your triples come from with his speed. That's where your homers come from as well. So they want more of that. And that's how you unlock your potential of becoming a 30-plus home run player, which is how you get into the MVP conversations and all of that. Eric Hosmer was never that guy. Eric Hosmer was somebody that was a consistent 20 home run hitter. And that might be where Jordan Walker ends up. And if you have somebody like Ivan Herrera who can take that next step and become a 290-plus hitter with 25 home runs, and you add in, Nootbaar's now a 25 home run hitter, and Brendan Donovan is a guy that's going to bring that on-base percentage to the lineup. At the bottom of the lineup, you have Victor Scott, who maybe steals 40 bags this year, and Mason Wynn, who's still a league average hitter, and Wilson Contreras, yeah, you're a 25 home run hitter this year as well. Now you look at it in the aggregate, and yeah, it's disappointing that maybe Jordan Walker didn't become what we were hoping for, But man, he could still be a damn good player that produces at a really high level and can bat consistently in that 3 to 7 range of your order. So if that's what he becomes, so be it. But right now, the offense when you look at it, again, in the aggregate, it's been a hell of a lot of fun to watch, man. It's to me the most surprising thing so far this year. I'm not shocked about the pitching being average plus, probably, to start out the season.
Yeah.
The defense, I thought there was at least a decent chance that they were pretty good defensively. They've got a lot of guys that are solid. Jordan Walker was the real question, and then Wilson Contreras at first, who has been a surprise. I think he's mostly, outside of one play, been really good over there at first base so far this year. And then it goes back to Ivan Herrera and what he's been so far defensively.
We knew he wasn't going to be good.
I do want to ask you real quick, on the pitching side, Sonny Gray was a big conversation last week. Going into the season, we didn't know what he was going to be. I would say outside of one pitch, I think if they're in a different situation there yesterday where they hadn't already, and we're recording this, by the way, on Thursday afternoon, in that Wednesday game, the finale against the Angels, they kept him in. I think a lot of that is because their bullpen was fried. If they had one of their best relievers to go into that spot, I think they probably do it. But instead, Ollie sticks with him, makes a pitch that he would like to have back, and it ends up going over the wall. But otherwise, I think Sonny Gray's been better than I expected him to be. Velo's back up, looks fine now. The strikeouts were back up yesterday. The walks were 0. I've been really impressed by what we've seen thus far from Sonny, and that's a highly encouraging sign considering his spring was alarming for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I think the start on Wednesday, yesterday, that was the one for me where I was like, okay, he is totally fine. Because the sweeper looked good, the velo was up again, as you had mentioned. Even the home run that he did end up giving up, it wasn't even a bad pitch. I mean, that was kind of a fastball that was out of the zone, and give credit to Ohapi. He was able to lift and put that ball into right center field. Like, it wasn't even a bad pitch for a home run.
It was just up more than you'd want for a single.
Sure, but that I agree with. But, I mean, that's still a hard ball to get to and hit it over the wall. But for Sonny Gray, like, the numbers are inflated because of that. I think he looks great. I thought that first start against Minnesota, I was like, you can kind of tell he's still battling it, but the stuff looks crisper than it did in spring training. Watching him Wednesday, I looked at that start and said, he is totally fine. I have no more concerns about him. The home run ball's still an issue, clearly, for him, because I think he's given up 3 home runs in the first 2 games so far. That's something, as long as you limit the damage like he did last year to mostly solo home runs, you can live with. But I have no concerns about him. He's going to be fine and back to his ace form.
Sonny fits into the next conversation that we wanted to have, which relates to Ivan Herrera, who was the story of the game, 3 home runs, the first Cardinals catcher to do so, one of the youngest players to do that in a Cardinals uniform as well. He was unbelievable, and he's been great at the plate so far this season. However, defense is a part of it. And when you're going to play catcher, especially for this team, defense is always going to be a part of the conversation. T-Bone, when Sonny is on the mound, you mentioned this to me off air, you can live with Ivan Herrera behind the plate. Because he strikes out so many batters, you have so few base runners, it's not a huge deal. How do you feel about Ivan Herrera being behind the plate when Sonny Gray is not on the mound, though?
Oh, it's a little less great, because the reason that you can get away, and I don't even know if get away is the right word, but the perfect starter to have Ivan Herrera behind the plate for is the guys that have swing and miss stuff.
It's Paul Skeens.
Yeah. Oh, he'd be great for Paul Skeens. It is the guys that don't allow base runners. And Sonny Gray is that guy. Like, in that game at one point, I think he'd only allowed 4 base runners before he ran into that issue where he ends up giving up the grand slam in that outing. And that was when, I think it was right after we got off air, I said, that's perfect. If Ivan Herrera's only seeing 4 guys on base the whole time he's behind the plate, you can live with that. And then, honestly, if it's a walk or a single and that guy steals second base, you still trust Sonny Gray's stuff to where you can look at him and go, yeah, okay, you stole second base. Sonny's not going to allow the ball to be put in play. We don't really care that you took that extra back. Though you manufactured some slugging against us, it's not the end of the world that Ivan Herrera can't throw you out. But when you get to guys like Miles Michaelis, the Eric Fetties, Palantes, who are okay with their strikeout stuff, Michaelis not at all, that's when it gets a lot tougher, because the more guys that are on base, the less likely that is Michaelis is going to limit those guys from getting on, and then they can really start the carousel on him. Sonny Gray typically going to allow 1 base runner, potentially in an inning. You can live with that. You cannot be living with guys like Michaelis. So for me, I would start Pages every time Michaelis starts. I don't care what day of the week it is. Michaelis is the one guy Pages should probably be paired with.
And you can make that work. That just becomes hey, he's with him. and we'll figure it out from there, right? The rotation, then you can adjust accordingly. So far this season, Ivan Herrera, while behind the plate, has allowed 5 stolen bases. 0 caught stealing, 5 stolen bases. He's been behind the plate for all of 32 innings. Last year, he allowed 55 steals, and 4 of the would-be base stealers were caught. He did that in 470 innings. The book's out, man. If he's behind the plate, they're running. Now, this weekend's going to be a big test because Boston has some speed. After that, you look at the way that the schedule sets up as well, and Pittsburgh should be a big test for him, too. Philly, not so much, but you get later on into the schedule, and whether it's Milwaukee or Cincinnati, as you get more and more into the divisional matchups, all of those teams are stealing bases, man. So what are you interested in terms of how they manage this going into the weekend? Like, how do you want to see them give Ivan Herrera the at-bats that are obviously necessary for him because of how great he is at the plate, while also maintaining some level of managing the would-be base stealers?
I think if you're the Cardinals, you've got to just stick with Herrera for 2 of the 3 games in both of these series against Pittsburgh and Boston. And I know that puts you in a bad spot, especially because what you're saying, those teams are really running so far here early on in the season. I think you have to I think you have to keep his bat in the lineup because I think the question about when do you play Ivan Herrera, it all depends on his offense. If he is hitting, I don't really care about the defense because it sticks to us having an offensive identity, and that is going to allow us to be successful because I think their offense is going to have to carry their pitching if they're going to be a winning baseball club in 2025. I also think you have to see if this whole knee experience that they keep talking about, which call me skeptical, they're going to have him thrown from his knees. Now, to their credit, the one time, I mean, you mentioned the 5 stolen bases so far this year. The only one that's been particularly close, and if I remember correctly, they challenged and lost, and I think it was mostly just because there was not a good enough angle to see if he was out or not. He threw it from his knee. We'll see if that adjustment really makes sense. But to me, you cannot just say, all right, let's try 2 games of this. Oh, okay, still has the noodle arm. We can't really have him behind the plate and then abandon it this weekend. This is the first test for Ali Marmol with this roster and going with this offensive identity, quote-unquote, over defense first.
So Friday, you got Fetty on the mound. Saturday, it's Palante. And then Sunday, it's Michaelis. My guess is, to your point, Sunday's probably his off day.
Yeah.
You'll get the day off there because you also travel, and then on Monday you're going to Pittsburgh. You got Matthew Liberatore on the mound. So you probably have Pages behind the plate on Sunday. They map this stuff out ahead of time, similar to what a hockey team would do with their goalies. They probably have Pages behind the plate on Sunday. I will be fascinated to see, though, late innings, what do you do? Up by a run, down by a run, close game, what do you do in these spots, man? And they've been going in a number of different directions with this where there are times where it came back to bite them. What was that, Monday against the Angels, where his spot comes up, Pedro Pages is in the game, and you don't just get 1 at-bat out of it, you get 2 because you took Ivan Herrera out of the game early. I think that's the way that they would do it over again. Like I think they feel like they were right to do it that way. And whether you feel that way or not, it's less significant. It's about what they think they should be doing right now. And that, to me, is one of the biggest storylines going into the next 2 to 3 weeks of the season is how do they manage this? Because it's not an easy thing to do, man. Managers don't want to be pulling their catcher midway through the game because they cannot trust them defensively. You don't want to go into the 7th inning with a new catcher every time that you're going into these late games if they're close. Best case scenario for the Cardinals is they just blow out all these teams and you don't have to worry about it, right? But realistically speaking, that doesn't happen a lot in Major League Baseball. This offense, while it's been good, man, you're going to play a lot of close games this year. That should be the expectation. I don't know how they handle this. It's not an easy spot to be if you're an Ali Marmol. I know you need to get as many at-bats as possible for Ivan Herrera, and this should be the evaluation time, but when is that moment where you say, all right, that's it, switch it up, let's go to Pedro Pages here? It's going to be typically in that 6th or 7th inning after Ivan Herrera takes that at-bat, and then they're going to go to Pages afterwards, but if it's close and they end up retaking the lead, you're going to want Ivan Herrera's bat back into the lineup because not only can he do damage, he's also great with runners in scoring position because he just consistently puts the ball in play.
Yeah, what will make it interesting, too, is I mentioned the swing and miss with the rotation. Like, those are the most ideal guys. Well, typically that is what's in your bullpen, right? It should be guys like a Fernandez who had strikeout stuff last year, Helsley who was electric, and Maton looks fantastic, by the way, when we talk about pitching. The reason I bring that up is where I thought the mistake was in that Angels game was you could plan out that Herrera was going to get another at-bat. And if you trust in your bullpen stuff, I think it's an easy conversation. And I'm not disagreeing with Ollie and the coaching staff of, hey, we should bring in Pa as a defensive replacement. No, they're right about that. I mean, he is better defensively than Ivan Herrera. But if you still have an at-bat and it is a one-run game, you're up only by one, I think you have to continue to play the game of, okay, well, we've got to plan for that next at-bat to be Ivan Herrera's. It cannot be an at-bat for Pedro Pages. And that's where I think, to me, they should learn the lesson from that scenario is we pulled him too early. We should trust more in our bullpen stuff that they are not going to allow base runners, which then we don't have to worry about the defense of Ivan Herrera. Now, where they might push back on that, and so far it would be, hey, well, they're not striking out guys. Their bullpen has not had much strikeout stuff so far this year. I think that's going to get better. I think that is just one of those first 6 games, weird numbers, as you mentioned, such a small sample size. That's where I think they need to learn. I agree defensively you need to make sure that you get Pages in the game in late game situations. But if it's a 1-run game, even a 2-run game, I would still say, hey, if I can look at my lineup card and go, Herrera's guaranteed an at-bat in the bottom of the 7th or the bottom of the 8th inning, I'm sticking with him still in this baseball game.
The ironic part to all of this is the time when you would really want him in the game, talking about Pedro Pages, is like the 6th or 7th. Because their best dudes, the Cardinals' best dudes that have the highest strikeout rates in the bullpen are coming in the 8th and the 9th.
Yeah.
And in the 9th inning, like Ryan Helsley, you're not all that worried about the base runner over at first potentially getting to second because he's got the potential to just strike out the next 3 dudes. Who cares? Okay, yeah, cool. Stand at second. You're going to be stranded there because nobody's going to put a ball in play. So it's actually less valuable to have Pedro Pages in at that point in the game, which is what you end up doing. You lessen the value of that defensive switch if you wait longer into the game. So it is this, like, you are truly between the rock and the hard place of, if you keep Ivan Herrera in that 6th or 7th inning, you almost want to keep him in for the rest of the game to keep that potential of him going up to the plate if you need it. I don't envy Ollie Marmol's position.
No.
Best case scenario here is he just shows to be capable. They find something that can unlock his arm or unlock his ability to throw out guys at second. It doesn't have to be every one of them. If this dude is like 15% in throwing out runners, dude, you can live with that because of how great he is behind the or at the plate with his bat. You just can't live with 0 for 5 and like 3 for 55. That can't happen. Just simply be below average, not worst in the league bad. And they've got to get him to that place. That has to be the number one goal for this shot or for this coaching staff right now. They've got a lot of them that they're working with. Got to get Mason Wynn back on track offensively. You've got to get Wilson Contreras back on track offensively. Wilson, you got to keep working with him at first, right? All of these different things. Develop players at the major league level. Keep figuring out what you can do with this bullpen. Find the rules. Also, maybe at the top of that list, please make Ivan Herrera into a usable major league catcher behind the plate because, my God, this guy looks good offensively right now. So in your mind, T-Bone, right now, with where we're at, again, 6 games into the season, this could change next week when we have these exact same conversations on the pod. How do you think Ollie Marmol has done, and this coaching staff in general has done when it comes to managing through what they're trying to do in 2025, which is win as many games as possible while also managing for the future? It is a really difficult needle to thread, and that's what they're trying to accomplish this year. How would you say Ollie and his staff have done about that so far?
I think they've done a great job so far in trying to thread this needle. And I think where they've done the best job in this so far is the fact that they're sticking with a lineup for the most part. They are getting Pages into games, but most of them have been the defensive replacement. And I'm not going to get upset if Herrera starts 2 out of 3 games. There is no more Yadier Molina where that guy starts like 10 in a row before finally getting a day off. And you don't have to remember Tony Cruz's name as the backup catcher. But so that I'm okay with. I think the part that I was wondering about was, okay, through the first 6 games, are they going to try and kind of pull one guy out so they can get Gorman in? And for the most part, they haven't done that.
Not at all.
And that's the part where, and I understand, like, hey, they needed to get answers on Nolan Gorman. I don't necessarily mind what they're doing. I like the fact that they're saying, hey, these are the 9 guys that we are going with. We are not going to do what we did in 2023, which was we had 5 outfielders, and we were yo-yoing those guys back and forth, in and out of the lineup, in and out of the lineup. And they admitted, hey, the lesson learned from 2023, outside of we need to be good defensively, is we can't do that. We've got to give these guys a runway, see if they perform, and if they don't, then we'll adjust. And that's the part that I've been happiest with them. And I think Ollie's done a good job so far. I know we had some disagreements on the Angels game on Tuesday. I thought he managed that game perfectly because I didn't. He stuck with. I know Pages got at-bats in the ninth inning, but he eventually went to Herrera in the dire need situation when they were trailing in that game. I thought he managed that well. He didn't go to the hands team going into extra innings. He stuck with Jordan Walker in the outfield, who later came around to get an at-bat later on to try and potentially win the ball game.
Came back to him. It certainly worked out.
I think Ollie's done a good job so far this season.
I think he's done a really good job. I especially love what the lineup looks like. I mentioned this prior to opening day.
Yeah.
I think the lineup that he has gone with is like you're maximizing everything you have. And I know some had pushed back against the notion of Mason Wynn batting ninth. It was convenient for him that Mason Wynn struggled the way that he did in spring training and then has continued to struggle the way that he has so far throughout the regular season. Hopefully that changes. He got that knock. It seems like that was a weight lifted off of him. You could see him at first just like, thank God. Thank God we got that one out of the way. But I like the look of the lineup on a day-in, day-out basis. It's the left-right that he loves against right-handed pitchers. And then I like the dynamic ability of it with having that three-hole against left-handed pitchers. It basically becomes a designated spot where you're going to have a pinch hitter, and you're almost daring the opposing manager, hey, go ahead. Yeah, bring in that right-handed pitcher here. Go ahead and do it. Let's see what that looks like as you go through Wilson Contreras, Luken Baker, and Nolan Arenado. I dare you. Because what you can do is just bring in your lefty. Whether that's Nolan Gorman or a lot of the time it's been Alec Burleson so far, depending on what the situation calls for.
Yeah.
I love that, man. It's the right way to get the most out of Luken Baker, who's really, really good against left-handed pitchers. This is basically the role they had Albert Pujols in when he was here in 2022 early on that season. So I like the lineup construction. I think it's really smart the way they've gone about that. It also takes a little bit of pressure off of Walker, Scott, and Wynn, which I like for them. The other thing that I would say here is I would be curious to see how they deploy these pinch hitters. That is something that I don't know that I would say I have been critical of Ollie thus far. I've just been curious about it. Because there are situations, there was one with Mason Wynn, and he decided not to pinch hit for him. As I've had more opportunities to think back on that, it's probably the right call. You can't lose Mason Wynn this early in the season. You can't tell him, I don't have confidence in you. You want to instill as much confidence as possible in that player. At the time, I second-guessed it. I thought, probably got to put Gorman into that situation. I still think ideally you would. That's probably a decision you make in July, though. Maybe not in March or April. Other than that, though, this is a team that should have a much better bench than it did a year ago, and certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, honestly. I just don't know who you're pinch hitting for, outside of when you're going up against a lefty and you have Luken Baker into the lineup as that three-hole hitter. Sure, that's an obvious spot. If they bring in a right-handed pitcher, we can deploy that pinch hitter there. There just aren't a lot of other guys that you're pinch hitting for on this team, despite having a better bench than you've had in the past. And I do think that's going to cause some potential friction there of how do we give these at-bats for somebody like a Gorman or a Luken Baker, especially when there's a lefty starter on the mound.
Yeah, so the one thing that I do disagree with on Ollie was that win situation that you brought up. Because I think if you're the St. Louis Cardinals, I think it's okay to say this season, especially if you're Ollie Marmol and they rave about the relationship he has with the players, I think it's okay to say we're going to go kind of a pack mentality. And what that also includes is the bench. Because you're right. Like, it's hard. Outside of that DH spot, when it is Alec Burleson, it's hard to figure out where's the pinch hitter, where's Luken Baker's spot to pinch hit. It is Alec Burleson against a lefty, and then it's Gorman against a righty if they go that route.
On that note, remember a couple of years ago, speaking of this exact same situation, when it was Albert Pujols who was pulled from the game for Nolan Gorman? So we've seen him do stuff like this in the past.
And the thing that the way that I would like to see the Cardinals handle that is when you do have a guy struggling, maybe it's not the conversation of do we pull that guy out of the lineup, especially if it is just a, hey, like I'll use Donovan, for example. Say he goes through an 0 for 20 stretch here. I don't think the Cardinals look at that and go, time for Gorman. That's the spot for Nolan Gorman. I think you look at him and you go, we still believe in Brendan Donovan because he got off to a hot start. There will be situations, though, where you're clearly feeling it. We need to win early on, and I think this is the threading the needle part of this for Ollie Marmol. So, yeah, maybe we do in a big game situation where you're just not feeling it and you're 0 for your last 20. bottom of the ninth inning, there are 2 outs, we need a base hit, we're going to go to Gorman because he's feeling better. And I think that's where that conversation would have been with Mason Wynn, and especially for Wynn, because it's not like you can look at this roster and go, if we're not starting Wynn at shortstop, who's the guy that we're going to start there? They don't have that. It's not like at second base.
He's
with
their
Gorman.
answer for now, for the future, for
exactly.
everything. Like, he's the guy.
And I think Wynn would understand, yeah, I'm not in a great spot right now. It is time for somebody to take this one at-bat. Cardinals still have faith in me, and if those guys are looking internally at themselves and they believe in what they are telling the public, which is, hey, we're a better baseball team than you're giving us credit for, they need to win now.
I would also add this. I go back and forth in my mind because my initial reaction to that spot was, you've got to pinch hit Gorman here. This is a clear Gorman spot. You've got to go to him. He's also been good, which helps. And Mason Wynn had been terrible at that point in time and looked non-competitive.
Yeah.
On the other side, you want to show faith in Mason Wynn, and he's a super emotional player. Like, if he does come through in this spot, it could be the thing that gets him going. So I understand that perspective on it as well. And then I go back to the other side of, yeah, but in that spot, even when you get into July, wouldn't you rather have your best left-handed hitter going up against that right-handed pitcher in that spot?
Yeah.
Like, what are the odds that Wynn is actually your best answer in that situation? And this is not a shot against Mason Wynn. I'm as big of a Mason Wynn fan as you'll find here in St. Louis. But you have to be honest with yourself. And I think Mason Wynn's a pretty clutch player, but you normally don't have a threat like Nolan Gorman or Alec Burleson coming off of the bench. That's a rarity. That is a luxury that the Cardinals have at their disposal this year that has not been the case in a really long time, man. So if you have that, you must deploy it correctly. And that's probably the spot where you need to deploy it. Because if not there, then where, dude? Like, who are you pinch hitting for on this team? It's not Newt. It's not Contreras. It's not Donnie. It's not Arenado. It's not against right-handed pitching. Alec Burleson against lefties. Sure, that's where you're doing that platoon between him and Luke and Baker potentially.
Maybe Scott, but even
not
then,
Herrera, not Walker right now with the way that he's been playing.
Well, and even like Scott, like right now, I wouldn't pinch hit for him because he's giving you competitive at-bats.
Maybe against a lefty. Like, you could make an argument,
Sure,
I suppose, for that.
But you only got one right.
It's just
right-handed
Luke and
option.
Baker.
Yeah.
Unless you, on that day, have Ivan Herrera on the bench, and that's a whole different discussion where, like, they seem really hesitant to use him on off days right now.
Yeah.
That is something that I would like them to get over. Hey, man, if Ivan Herrera is off and you have a big at-bat coming up late in the game, deploy that dude. He's one of your best hitters. Right now, he's probably your best hitter. So use that at every possible turn that you can. But yeah, like Victor Scott, maybe. It's really Mason Wynn, and I know this sounds crazy. As of today, is he the weakest hitter on this team that's in the everyday starting lineup?
Yeah, I think so.
And I'm not just saying that because of his struggles early on this season. I'm saying overall, like my projection for them as of today, maybe Victor Scott. You could argue Victor Scott, and I would understand it. But if Walker continues looking this way, forget the results. Just the way that he's looking right now, he's a better hitter than Mason Wynn. I think Mason Wynn today against righties and Victor Scott against lefties would be your weakest hitters in this lineup.
Yeah, I agree. It would be Wynn or Scott. Right now, I would say it's Wynn because I think we've seen Scott's got a pretty good batter's eye, and I'm not saying Wynn doesn't, but like if Wynn's not hitting for average, he's not on base, and that's the big thing. And like though Contreras is in it right now in his struggles, he's walking, man. I mean, you saw the big bat flip from his walk in the game against the Angels yesterday in the big inning. So I think you're right. I think it is Mason Wynn, but again, like to your point on Herrera, and this is one critique that I've had of Oli Marmol in the past, and I don't think he's been caught in this spot yet this year. Maybe this Gorman Wynn one that we keep talking about, but he's not as aggressive as I think he needs to be when it comes to deploying some of his pieces, right? And part of that is the shortstop conversation. He's always constantly thinking, and he brought this up in this game, of, well, if we get to extras, we have to have Mason Wynn in the game to play shortstop, which to an extent I agree. I understand. I understand where he's coming from. I got to get to extras first, man. And if that means I got to go an inning with Brendan Donovan as my shortstop, maybe even 2 innings if it's tied after 10, I get it. That's not ideal. I got to get there first.
I think the extra innings rule just makes these managers lose their mind. I think part of it is that. Like, I think you brought up a scenario the other day where it's, hey, do you use Helsley in the 9th, or do you actually wait to use him in the 10th inning because you have that man on second, and then the strikeouts actually become that much more important? That's something that I think some teams are doing. I prefer the way that Ollie's going about it because I think I need to get that requires me to get to extra innings. I would rather end this here in the 9th. And this gives me the best chance to end it here in the 9th. I'm always more aggressive-minded in that way. I'm more aggressive with the pinch hitting situations. Like, I, in general, just prefer that style of manager. I'm getting the sense
you wouldn't have a good relationship with the guys as the manager.
Sure. But there's that, whether it's the relievers or, hey, do I walk a guy to potentially set with one out? Do I walk somebody intentionally to set up the potential for the double play? These managers just lose their minds with some of this stuff, and I think Ollie is not immune to that. And the setup also just lends itself to second-guessing whatever it is that your manager does, because the likelihood is you're going to give up at least a run once you get into that extra innings. All right, so we've talked a lot about what has happened so far for the St. Louis Cardinals. We're 6 games in. They're 4-2, two extra innings losses. They're probably overall a little better than we expected them to be at this point. What's been the biggest surprise for you? If you could just name one thing that has really surprised you through the first 6 games of the regular season, what's it been?
I think the biggest surprise for me through 6 games for the Cardinals, I think the first one would be just how comfortable Walker and Scott look up at the big league club here, talking with the work, and we've talked about their offense all day long. Those guys look comfortable, and I wasn't necessarily expecting that. I thought you were still going to see the struggles of Jordan Walker. I really thought that you were going to see Victor Scott potentially really regress once we got to the regular season, though I thought he did deserve to be on the opening day roster based on his spring training because everything looked different. I still thought there was going to be a decent regression, especially in terms of him just hitting the ball hard, and that necessarily hasn't changed. I would say the other pleasant surprise for me is that we haven't seen Ollie Marmol really abandon anything yet. With how much we've been talking about how clustered this roster is, I thought there was a chance you'd see Ollie. I don't know if panic's the right word, and maybe winning the first 3 games really set them up to be where he's not in this spot yet. But if he is threading that needle of winning and trying to win in April to try and get fans back because there's nobody there right now, I thought for sure there would be some panic moves of, okay, Herrera was 0 for 4, gave up 2 stolen bases, he's out of the lineup today. Victor Scott didn't catch that one ball in center field. All right, Siani's in. Oh, Walker, oh yeah, 0 for 4, 3 strikeouts, chasing that slider. Oh, and made a bad play defensively. All right, we're going to go with Scott in right field, and Siani gets to start in center field.
Yeah, and hey, Nolan Gorman, you've been great. Cool,
hey,
you're
on
going
the
to get
bench.
regular opportunities now. Instead of being on the bench and starting 2 out of the first 6 games, you're going to be out there more often now. No, he's sticking with it. We said early on, hey, somebody's going to have to be the odd man out here. And if they try to make it work to where it ends up being like a mismatch of a bunch of guys getting off days and stuff that can just get kind of wonky, they haven't done that. They've been consistent. They said, hey, Nolan Gorman was the one that we said coming into the season will be the odd man out. And he has been, despite some of the success that he has had thus far at the plate. And he's been really good when he's had his opportunities early on there. For me, my biggest surprise early on this season is just how rejuvenated Nolan Arenado looks. I didn't know what to make of his spring training. There's some stuff out there where it was like, hey, the bat speed is starting to come back. This might be a sign that he's going to be a better version of himself this year. And he talked about how he tried to unlock his body with a bunch of different movement stuff in the offseason. He looks more athletic in the field. He's never going to be a guy that looks super spry or athletic. He chugged it down the first baseline to force an errant throw. It was also just a really bad defensive play. Totally understand that. But Arenado a year ago is walking to first base in that spot. And in this spot, he's not moving fast, but he is chugging his arms down the first baseline in an attempt to make the play close. And hey, man, credit for him. He made it close. He ends up getting on via the error there. So Nolan Arenado's just overall resurgence. He is a impact bat in the middle of your lineup right now. I didn't anticipate that. And we'll see. We'll see if this continues. Maybe this is just a hot stretch and we'll get a month into the season and it looks more like it did last year as the wear and tear on his body starts to add up. That's entirely possible. But if I'm giving you a surprise through the first 6 games, for me, it's been just how energetic Nolan Arenado looks, how re-engaged he looks with his teammates, and most importantly, just how productive he has been with his bat at the plate. I've been very impressed by Nolan Arenado thus far.
Yeah, he has been very good. And I don't know if he's going to get – we talked a little bit about this on the show today. I don't know if he's going to get back to that 30 home run guy because he's still – he's hitting the ball a little harder, but you're still seeing some of those swings where it is. And I think it's in right spots, too, of, hey, I'm just going to flare this one into right field. We need a little base hit. Don't care how we get it. I'm just going to give what the pitcher gives me, or I'm going to take what the pitcher gives me, and then he's driving in those runs. And if this year they actually have guys on base when he is up there, and I know at times he had that last year because they had the run and scoring position problem, then I'm okay if he's not hitting like 30 home runs. He's just playing smart baseball at the plate. I almost threw this out there, by the way, as another pleasant surprise, but I think it's too soon so far, is the one start for Matthew Liberatore. I thought Libby looked great. And when I have to say...
basically a third of a bat inning.
Yeah. And when I have to say his biggest problem that inning was too many strikes. Dude, that is a good thing for the St. Louis Cardinals. And I know Ollie was kind of already taking his victory lap at the podium that night. Hey, yeah, this is why we think he can be a star. All right, relax, Ollie. I'm not there yet. But you've got my attention now from his spring training and then carrying it over and looking really good. Fastball, he was able to maintain the velo outside that one inning. That's when it dipped. Was able to recover, was able to get that. Abandoned the curveball, which I'm okay with if he doesn't think he's going to be able to get guys out with that pitch. Implemented a slider that he was using to get in on the righties and the cutter as well. And then I think he had a changeup in there as well. He looked great. And again, I think it's too early to say it was a pleasant surprise. Give me 2-3 more starts, and then we can really talk about it. But yeah, he deserves his credit for his outing.
That was why you want to see it.
Yeah.
Now we'll see if it can sustain. Again, like most of these conversations that we're having, it's 6 games. It's for him just one start. It's 6 innings, but looked pretty damn good, and it showed you why they wanted to find out if he can be a starter. It's also why I supported it. Like, let's find out once and for all. If it goes poorly, then you adjust on the fly, man. You put Steven Matz back into the rotation, who, by the way, also looked really good in his first outing. All right, last thing here before we get out of here. It's been a fun show today. There's a lot to discuss, and it's mostly positive, which hopefully it continues this way, man. I've got my fingers crossed. No.
Okay.
But we've been talking a lot about what it has been. Now we're kind of projecting forward to what it's going to be. They've got a 6-game road trip, Boston and then Pittsburgh. For me, T-Bone, the number one thing that I'm going to be looking for in this road trip is, what does your pitching look like? Because in the first couple of series, I just don't know how much the Twins or the Angels are going to be like these massive threats with their bats. I think you went up against actually some pretty decent pitching, which is why the offense has been so impressive to me. But I don't know how much your pitching was really tested in these first 2 series. We'll see. Maybe the Angels' lineup is going to be better than we expect. But Boston's got a real lineup. And Pittsburgh, while it's not a great lineup, they have a couple of dudes that can really hurt you in the middle of that order. So I am most curious about the pitching side of things, and that's both the starters and the bullpen, to find out, okay, was that real? Are you guys going to be worrisome throughout the course of the season? I want to see what the pitching looks like in these 2 series that are upcoming. What do you have your eye on?
Yeah, the starting pitching will be the one for me in that Boston series. Pittsburgh, I get Pittsburgh's got some guys in the middle of that order. If your pitching's bad against Pittsburgh, I will definitely be sounding the alarm bells on our next podcast next Thursday about their issues, because that to me is a bad lineup, and the only reason that it feels like it could be a little better is because they run a lot. But that is something that I will tie into this is, what does Herrera look like now throwing from a knee? I got my eye on the pitching when they go up against that Red Sox lineup, because you're right, there are some guys in there, and eventually Devers is going to hit. When he does, watch out. I'll be curious to see what they look like as a rotation in Boston. They've got the guys that you're getting some of your better guys there. I mean, you're getting Fetty, Palante in that series. Michaelis, okay. But it'll be worth keeping an eye on them and that bullpen, because you're right, the bullpen's the one that we'll see how serious of a concern they are, because they were the most disappointing part of the first 6 games of the season. But I think you've got to look at the running game. How well do they contain these 2 teams that have been running so far early on, and what effect does that have on the pitching? You know, I think there's a chance that we could potentially come in after those 2 series on the road and say, yeah, pitching wasn't great. How much of it, though, was because Herrera's not getting guys out? How much more havoc is being caused because now a runner at first steals second base, single scores him. Unlike if he doesn't end up going, single, he's at third base. And that's a difference of a run, and how often does that happen?
The other thing that I would monitor this weekend, Nolan Arenado going to Boston, a team that effectively chose a different third baseman over him. He has no lack of motivation going into this season. And we've already seen through the first 6 games, and Ollie always says this, a motivated Nolan is a scary Nolan. We didn't exactly see that last year, but we have seen it so far this season. There will be no series that he is more motivated for than this one right here, because they chose somebody over him. Imagine that as a future Hall of Fame third baseman saying, oh, you guys like, is that dude better than me? Okay. let's go ahead and see what it would have looked like had I played 181 games here at Fenway instead of just this 3-game series that you're about to see me for. Let's go ahead and see that. I will be keeping my eye on that for sure. I think that's an underrated storyline going into this weekend against the Boston Red Sox. All right, that's all we've got for you guys today. We appreciate you tuning in as always. We will be back again next week. This is episode 2 of the Redbird Report. If you have not done so yet, please subscribe, please rate us, and please review us as well. If we get some of those reviews in, we'll try to answer some of your questions at the end of the podcast over the next few weeks. So be sure to do that over on Apple, iTunes. Make sure if you're listening on Spotify, you check it out over there as well. We are wherever you are. So thanks for listening today. He's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. This is the Redbird Report on 101 ESPN.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Hendrickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.